Andy, thank you so much for having this conversation. It's really great to see you.
It is wonderful to be together.
It's always great to see you. You are, I don't want to start with flattery, but you are one of my favorite human beings. And you have such a beautiful mind. And I mean that not just in the sense of horsepower, but you have a beautiful mind. You have a beautiful way that you see, a lens by which you see the world. And you walk with such thoughtfulness, but also joy. And I feel like those things often are
Hmm.
mutually exclusive. And
It's a two by
so
two.
it's it's just really good to be with you.
Thank you.
And I want to have this conversation because you're one of the few short-listed people I know in the contemporary kind of Christian world that is thinking and talking about this ancient paradigm of a rule of life.
Hmm.
And so I just want to suss all the gold out of you. So let's just start for people that are new to this concept.
Yeah.
What is a rule of life, and how did you? This is not language or paradigm that I at least was familiar with, and I spent many decades growing up deep in the heart of the American church. What is a rule of life, and how did you come to it?
Yeah. I mean, a rule of life is familiar in the Catholic Church more than in the Protestant,
Yeah,
but even in the Catholic Church is associated with particular communities and
like
with
a monastic order,
exactly.
or yeah,
And of course, Catholics often speak of the religious, which is not everybody. It's actually people who have vowed themselves to a particular way.
yeah,
And every community of religious, which we would think of as monks and nuns and so forth, have a rule,
hmm,
at least since the days of St. Benedict. And so a rule is usually set of communal practices that guide a particular community in how they live and express their faith. Um, and it is something that was not, I think, the Reformation kind of collapsed the distinction between lay and religious,
yep.
and now we think of everybody. If you're Christian, you're
We're all
in
religious.
some
We're all
sense.
spiritual. Yeah. Hmm.
And of course, there's deep truth in that, and this deep, profound idea that we are all meant to consecrate our lives. It's not just a special vocation.
Yeah. There's not a higher level of discipleship
Right,
for a monk or a nun than for you and I.
right. That would be the Protestant way of thinking about it. But what was sort of lost along the way was the idea of if that's actually going to be true, if there really is a priesthood of all believers and a kind of consecrated life that typifies every believer, that maybe you would actually need a rule
Yeah.
to live that out. And instead, we kind of lost that vision for
And
a long
and do you
time.
think with it a call to a more rigorous like life of discipleship? The bar has been so
Yeah.
lowered to let everybody in that then you lose some level of like, okay, but this is what it means to follow Jesus.
Yes, this is the danger. I mean, I think the beautiful insight of the Reformation, which our Catholic brothers and sisters also have a way of expressing, is it's all grace. This is not anything you achieve, and so there's no rule that can kind of there's no ladder you can climb to
Yeah,
get
to make you a real Christian, or
right.
yeah,
But if you have been rescued by grace and infused with grace, what would you want your life to look like? That's where a rule can be helpful. And so I think more and more, well, and I would also say, under the conditions of Christendom, in which the whole culture, without any individual having to really think about it or do anything conscious or intentional, the whole culture has been, to some extent, arranged to follow some set of patterns that are thought to match up to what
and
the kingdom requires.
and just really quick define Christendom
Oh,
for
sure.
somebody
Well,
that's
Christendom, the era where the church and the political and civil authorities overlapped, whether in a kind of a Catholic country or a Protestant country, or a place
Victorian England
or a place
or
where there's
yeah,
an established church, where everybody gets baptized, and most people show up to church at least on notable occasions, and all the ceremonies of the culture inculcate the gospel. So, like even as recently as the coronation of a king, you can see still a vestige of Christendom in
yes,
the United Kingdom, where the just by being a citizen or a subject of that kingdom, when you watch the coronation, you're inducted into a sequence of things you do when some important event happens, the kinds of prayers you pray, the kinds of words that are appropriate, and without having to think about it or choose it, under the conditions of Christendom, culture kind of forms you.
yeah.
And now, always imperfectly, and there's lots of critiques to be leveled at that era of Christendom, but in any case, it's now gone.
Yeah, it doesn't matter because we're not living there anymore.
Um, even in the United Kingdom, really it's functionally gone in all kinds of ways that was not true just a generation or two ago.
Yeah.
So now we live in a time where I cannot expect that anything in the world around me is going to form me in the direction of the upside down kingdom of Jesus.
Yeah.
And if I am going to be shaped into the kind of person I actually want to be and have discovered by grace that I can be, I'm going to need some sort of formative practice. And this is where rule actually becomes worth considering again, you
Yeah.
might say.
And how did you come to this concept of a rule of life and begin
Yeah.
to live by one?
So only indirectly in that I had joined this community of Christians who were entrepreneurs. So Praxis, which is my
Yeah.
daily work, my full-time work, is as partner for theology and culture at this organization that exists to develop a kind of ecosystem or a community of people who start and sustain new ventures in the world, for-profit, nonprofit. So we have founders. I mean, think of entrepreneurs, you think of people who are starting things, and every sector. We've got people in tech, we've got people in clean water, we've got people in agriculture, we've got people in storytelling in LA, we've got like every biotech, like any possible sector of human activity. There are Christians who are starting new ventures with all the risk and all the uncertainty and all the possibility that involves. And Praxis was founded 13 years ago as we speak to try to serve and convene those folks and help them see fruit in what they're doing. So this was already underway. I joined as a partner, and one of the very first conversations that was happening as I joined was, it's one thing just to sort of hoover up all the Christians who do something and put them in a room, which is maybe not an unvaluable thing to do. But you actually find out, well, there's lots of different Christian ways of, or there's lots of ways of doing this that Christians do. So Christians are more and less honest in their dealings. Christians are more and less humble in what they do. Christians are more and less ambitious in what they do. And we had this vision, not just of sort of collecting every possible Christian who also is an entrepreneur.
And get them in a room to listen to a lecture.
Yeah, exactly. Or network, even network,
Yes.
right? I mean, you could think, well, everybody needs a network. But we had this hunch that a particular kind of formation needed to happen. Fundamentally, the way we think about it is to create people who are humble and ambitious at very high levels, both. So very humble and very ambitious. Now, in some ways, that almost sounds like a contradiction in terms, like you can't have both. But we actually believe there is a way to be profoundly ambitious for the thing you've been given to do in the world that you perhaps can see in a way that other people can't see, and deeply humble in the sense of submitted to God, submitted to other people, aware of your own smallness, aware of your own sinfulness. But generally speaking, that kind of combination does not happen by accident, and it definitely doesn't sustain itself by accident. So
which could likely be said of any strong Christian virtue. Doesn't happen by accident. It doesn't sustain itself by accident.
Yeah, exactly. And you can start well and finish poorly. Like you can start with amazing, and I think most people, I mean, when you start out life, unless you are really fairly psychopathic, you feel pretty humble. You feel pretty small before the challenges before you.
You have good desires. You want to end well.
Your intentions are good. But formative things come along in your life.
And deformative things come along.
And deforming things.
Constantly.
And one is actually success. And if you look at the world of startups that we're trying to serve and the good intentions with which people go in, compared to the very at minimum, complex and troubling things that come out the other end. I mean, so you think about a huge firm like Google, who in their founding charter, when they go public, they say, our motto is don't be evil, and then literally a few years later, they just quietly drop that. They're like, well, that's a little too high of a bar. And I'm not saying, of course, that Google is entirely evil, but there's this drift that comes with scale and success. Yeah. And we don't, we're going to see a range of outcomes in the Praxis community. Not everybody's going to build a Google for sure, but some of them might. And wouldn't it be amazing to have a community that can actually be continually forming us so that as whatever comes along, because failure also is very formative and deformative for people. And then people make really bad choices in the face of failure. How could we have a community that would, like, in a way, transcend success and failure and be creating all along humble, ambitious
So
people?
that's the question. That's the problem you're
That was
solving for.
that was the quest,
When you
right?
timestamp this, how do we form a community that,
Yeah,
in your example, is humble and
yeah,
ambitious,
yeah.
can steward both success and failure well, and how do we sustain that formation?
Yes,
And you were saying the
yes.
answer, the solution to the problem you came up with was a rule of life?
Certainly a piece of the answer. I mean, there's ultimately, there's no solutions to
Yes.
problems, right? It's all relationship and love ultimately. But what holds us in those relationships? There are tools and practices that can help.
Yes.
So we did decide to actually put into writing a rule of life for redemptive entrepreneurs, which is our way of framing what we're after, redemptive entrepreneurs. Um, and I think one helpful way to think of this is what we wrote down for our community is not. It's not like a general purpose manual on how to be a Christian. Generally speaking, it really addresses the vocational potentiality and temptation that is specific to being involved in starting new things that have a high degree of uncertainty and risk,
Interesting.
with a
So
high
it's not
degree of agency.
your rule of life is not your summary of all Christian
No,
spirituality and
there's
how to be a Christian.
all kinds of things like should Christians go to war? Not addressed in our rule of life. Not because we aren't implicated in war, but like this massive question of when can you use violence? How sexuality? Like how do we handle our creation as male and female and all that comes with that? We do talk about in the context of power because that's a very important thing and we need to address that. But we don't have a whole there's not a whole sexual ethic in our rule of life. Not because entrepreneurs who are Christian don't need to think about this, but because there's nothing specific to the entrepreneurial vocation, particularly that impinges on that massive area of being human.
I have a friend who was writing a rule of life for their church, and he had this great line. He said, "A rule of life is not all that we do, it's how we do all that we do."
Oh, wow. Yeah.
So it's not our attempt to summarize all of the
Yeah.
things that a serious disciple of Jesus does or a
Right.
community does. This is our lifestyle template.
Right.
This is the foundation that is undergirding the whole of our Christian life together.
Right.
It's
right.
how we do all that we do.
Yeah, I think that's right. And it is, I think to be helpful, it's always fairly context dependent in some
Yes.
way, in some way or another. So we gathered a little group of spiritual directors who had mentored people in our community, a couple theologians, real theologians, not like me, like real credentialed theologians, a couple entrepreneurs, a couple investors around a table and started drafting this. And it went through about a year and a half of exploration, revision. We had a substantial revision. There's one whole section that wasn't in the first draft that we tried with our first class of fellows, and they said, we really need this thing. So we ended up with a document that lays out 6 areas that we think if you don't attend to these as a redemptive entrepreneur, you probably will end up misshapen in
Yes.
some way.
And could you name the 6 for us?
Let's see if I can name them all
How deep is this rule of life in you?
Exactly.
Or not?
So I believe in order, time, money, imagination, power, decision-making, and community. So I honestly don't know if those are the order that we use, but I know we start with time because it is the scarcest thing actually in every human life in a way, or it's like the most non-adjustable thing. You can have more or less money, but you can't have more or less time. And one of the things about entrepreneurship is, I mean, there's lots of jobs and lots of vocations that are very demanding time-wise, but there is a ticking clock in every new venture. And one way that I think about it is money comes with a clock. And part of entrepreneurship is raising money. If you're a nonprofit, you raise philanthropic capital. If you're a for-profit, you raise investment capital. And that money always comes with a time horizon in which some kind of return is expected. Return on mission, return on financial return. And so the time pressure and then the number of things you have to fit into every day when you are just starting out. I mean, it's truly
starting everything from scratch.
So we felt like, gosh, if we don't address, the dynamics of hurry and anxiety and so forth that swirl around time, we'll be in trouble. Money is number two for a reason, which is that money swirls around entrepreneurship as well. And even nonprofit, because we work equally with for-profit and nonprofit. But even nonprofits, which are ultimately mission driven, and they're not driven by a financial bottom line in the way that for-profits are. But they require, money is the oxygen of organizational life in our economy. And so people have entrusted you with money. The very nature of doing what our entrepreneurs do means you probably have access to money that not all people do. I don't mean that everyone in our community comes from a whole lot of wealth or has a whole lot of wealth, but you're certainly thinking about money all the time. So we've got to have some practices with that. And then entrepreneurship is about imagination. It's about seeing something that doesn't exist yet and bringing it into being. And so stewarding and caring for our imagination is really critical. So they're in a kind of, there's two groups of three, because these first three are like they're the essential like ingredients of your daily life. But they're also the essential areas of temptation and distraction and devastation if you let them kind of spin out of control.
Time, money,
and imagination. And then there are these other realities, which are decision making. Every day you've got to make tons of decisions. How do you do that in a faithful way? Power, which is if you're a founder and then eventually a CEO or executive director, you have power has accumulated in you. How do you handle that? And then community. How do you do this not alone? Because entrepreneurship so often is conceived of as this kind of heroic journey by this brave individual. It's never actually that, but it is a temptation to become very isolated in the work of entrepreneurship. So those were the 6 for our community.
And then did you come up with practices at a kind of baseline level for that, or tell us about that?
Right. So then for each of those, we kind of went through this iterative process of asking.
So you started at more of like, here are the problems we're solving for.
Yeah, here are the areas.
And here's the kind of people we want to be in a time-bound culture where the norm in startup is insane hours, hurry, stress, overload, burnout, chewing people up. You want to be people that move at a different kind of pace with a different kind of ease.
Exactly.
So then you have to go from aspiration to practice at some level,
Yes, exactly. So there were a lot of wells we could draw from. Like all of these, the Christian tradition has resources to offer. Yes. So we tried to plumb those, draw from those wells. But then we also had the great thing about having this, in a sense, up and running community at that time, kind of a couple hundred people who were meaningfully connected with what we were doing. Among them, in any given area, were people you were like, oh my goodness, there's something about, this person's relationship to money and wealth that just feels healthy, feels sane, feels trustworthy. Let's go find out what they do.
What do they do?
So here's this person who just doesn't ever seem hurried, never seems worried about time. Well, what in the world do you do to make that possible? Because you've got this really complicated job you're doing. So there was that, just kind of mining the community for what are the practices, for the kind of practical wisdom that they were living out.
Which means, I think a lot of people don't think that way, connecting the dots between are there practices in this person's life. We just kind of think, well, just that's how Andy is. That's how Sue is. That's how Sarah is. They're great. And we don't necessarily realize that might not actually be how Sarah is or Andy is. They might be actually radically different. And so they've had to build their life in a way to counteract that.
I think this is so important because I think we have this idea that people are just innately good or bad people.
Yes.
And, John Mark is such a good guy. Which, first of all, is...
First off, my family's not saying that.
Not true.
Hey, come on, Andy. Come on.
But to the extent, and I think having had only 2 children, so N of 2, very small N, there are temperamental things. Like, so when you're a baby, like there are sweet tempered babies.
There's enough truth in that myth to keep us all believing it.
But if you meet a 50-year-old, especially who has been through the crucible of either success or failure, and there is something deeply admirable in that person, it is not by accident. I've never seen it. I've never seen the answer be, oh, well, they were just like that all along. They, even if they had some maybe advantages of a kind of even temperament or whatever, that they were just given by nature and grace, they have cultivated it. And so what we have found in our community is the exemplary people in our community are the most intentional people in our community.
Wow.
They're not accidental saints or accidental heroes. They're and usually there's deep stories of suffering and sacrifice, but that are behind that led them, or moments of great crisis. One of our mentors, who talks about this publicly and has written about it, and informed very deeply our decision-making practice, is a businessman from Houston named Terry Looper. He's had a whole lifetime of business now, built a very successful private business in Houston, who had an absolute total, well, he's spoken about all this publicly, just absolute total breakdown in his, I think, mid-30s as an ambitious young kind of would-be world changer. And Christian all along, but completely out of touch with the resources he needed to do and be who he really was called to be.
Yeah.
And had this profound break in every way, emotional, spiritual, physical. But on the other side of that, embraced these unbelievably radical practices. Like, you just would not believe how radical this guy is, that as it happens have borne amazing fruit in every kind of dimension of his life. And so we went to Terry and we said, how
do you do
talk
it?
to
What
us
are
about
those
this.
practices? What do you do?
And we literally just, with permission, copied it and put it in the rule because, but it's not by accident. It's not just that he's a good guy. It's that, no, he went through this crucible. He made some choices on the other side. And then just through compounding time, the fruit.
So you mind your community you started looking for people that have been formed along the lines of what you want to be formed into and you want your community to be formed into.
Yep.
And then you started reverse engineer
Yes,
out of their autobiography. Like, what are the practices?
Yep.
What are the experiences? How have you organized your life in such a way that over a long period of time you become this kind of a person?
Yeah. So what we ended up with was, for each of the 6, a baseline practice that felt like the floor of maturity, you could say. Like, so to start with time, the baseline practice is Sabbath, one day a week where you do no work. Because, first of all, it is
radical for entrepreneurs, huh?
Well, it's, oh my gosh, it is so, it's so unthinkable.
Yes.
It's so, I mean, we select, we're a pretty selective program for our core offering, which is this year-long accelerator program. And these are all people who have chosen to be in a Christian environment. A lot of them are also in Y Combinator and these other accelerators that are great, but just aren't specifically Christian. So these are all folks who have chosen to be in a Christian environment, but they come in to the first week that we do. And honestly, I mean, I don't know, maybe 1 every 3 years has any Sabbath practice.
Yeah.
It is just it's not how anyone lives in our culture, right? Let alone people who are starting.
That would be pretty true of most Christians in your average middle-class church.
Right,
yeah.
Right, totally. So, and we present this practice, this baseline. We're like, we think
this is the baseline. This is the floor.
Right.
1/7 of your life, you rest and worship and delight in God.
It is unthinkable if you haven't done it. And it feels impossible.
And then when it becomes a part of your life, it's unthinkable.
It's unthinkable
that you spent so many years without keeping Sabbath.
Yeah. So one of the most beautiful things, I mean, this is a bit of a tangent, but after the first, we do these kind of, essentially we have 3 times during the year where we're together in an intensive way. So at the end of the first week that we're together, we ask them to prototype Sabbath in their life, to find a way to build this in. And everybody takes a deep breath. They're like, this is not going to work. I don't know how to do it. And the amazing thing is when they come back a few months later, and it's never perfect, and never, none of us get this right quickly. But the delight and the freedom and the discoveries that people make, and many people then build whole Sabbath policies for their whole company, right? Because, of course, this is built into the Sabbath command. It's not just you don't do any work, but no one in your household, no indentured servant, no slave, no animal.
Not even your animals,
Not even your animals. So how do you actually create a Sabbath
Create
policy?
Sabbath, yes.
Which becomes a very important kind of second step, you could say. In fact, it is part of our baseline. I'm pretty sure we say, we do no work 1 day a week and make it possible for everyone in our sphere of authority to do no work, because it's very easy for the CEO to set an expectation. Oh yeah, I take vacations, but you better answer every email, every text message, whatever. So
So
the
baseline
baseline,
practice for
so
time
yeah,
is
is Sabbath.
Sabbath.
Baseline practice for money is tithing 10% of whatever we're entrusted with, income-wise, and that also is. These are not like easy things on average to adopt.
Yeah, what percentage of people coming into your program do you think are tithing? I think your language, I love it, is with special attention to the church and the poor.
Yeah, with this special attention to the needs of the church and the needs of the poor. I don't actually know what percentage, but we know what percentage we want coming out of the program.
Yes.
And incidentally, of all these things, tithing is the one that's like so much easier to start early in your life when you have usually very little money.
The less you make, the easier it is to give. Ironically.
And super ironically, the more you make, the harder it is to embrace that. And so it's so weird. And we have actual
It
statistics.
seems so counterintuitive,
So
but it
you would
will
think
always be harder to give
the
away
more you make, the harder it'll be.
$1 million than
Yep.
$100,
Yep.
no matter how much
Yep.
money you make.
And there's literal
I mean,
studies.
I would know, you know.
Yes, well, there's literal studies that like look at household income and generosity as a percentage basis, and it goes down.
It goes
with
down.
every bracket
Yes.
until you get to the very top bracket when the percentage ticks up.
Yeah.
But it isn't, even for the top bracket, the percentage given is not as high as the people in the smallest bracket.
Wow.
So it's just start early, start small, and it'll be a lot easier to keep doing it. Do you want to go through the other
Sure, I mean, you can give it to
baselines?
us real quick, at least a few more.
Time would be Sabbath,
yeah.
money would be tithing.
Imagination.
Imagination, a little harder to put into a single word, but we have limits on the quantity, frequency, and character of the media we consume. So the huge...
I love that tripart thing right there,
Yeah.
little round of quantity,
frequency,
and character,
character.
of this film series or
Right.
YouTube channel or podcast or movie.
Yeah. And the belief behind this is that we are in this unusual time in human history. I think it certainly feels unusual in some ways, where there's just such competition for our imaginations. And maybe it's that the fidelity of the false alternative is so powerful. So, I mean, people have always told stories. People always had myths. Those myths were not always edifying, but even the difference between sitting around a fire and hearing the village storyteller tell a story that doesn't just like take over your senses the way an IMAX screen does, right? Or the way even a small glowing rectangle does. There's just something about the screen and the amount of work that's being put and the commercial incentives that are being put into colonizing your imagination through the screen. It just felt like we needed to name, if you're going to be a person of deep imagination, it's not that we say you never watch entertainment at all. It's that you have a plan for how you consume it. And it involves how much, how often, and what kind. And so you got to have a plan. So then on the other three, we can sum up the power one in a single word, which is maybe an unexpected word, the word gleaning, which is this beautiful idea from the Hebrew Bible that you leave the edges of a field unharvested so that the poor who do not own land in an ancient context have the dignity of meaningful work. It's not just charity, you don't just hand out food, you provide a place for those who don't own land to do the work of landowners, and have the dignity of providing for their family. And the way we translate this is, we want everyone in our community to be asking, actually, ideally every day, what am I leaving undone so that someone else who may have less agency or intrinsic authority or ascribed authority, that they have a chance to do it. So just as important as for me as a public speaker, what speaking invitations did I say yes to today? Just as important are some things that I would have really liked to do that I intentionally say no to, and also say, oh, but you should meet this other person who maybe you don't know, who I actually think would do an amazing job with this. So gleaning is this practice that I don't just sort of gather up to myself all the opportunities and take all, all the way to the edges of the field, like
Yeah,
max
winner
it
take
out.
all, zero sum.
Right. It's this practice of letting go of the edges of opportunity and possibility, and like raising up other people who also are image bearers, also have something to contribute. Decision making, we pretty much took this straight from Terry Looper, and the baseline practice is just daily prayer, having a moment in your day where you stop. And Terry has this beautiful, we also talk about this later in the rule, but this beautiful thing, he says, you start every decision by consulting your friend Jesus, and just having a daily practice of consulting your friend Jesus on the challenges and beauty of the day. And then community is just starts, the baseline is participating in a worshiping community. The goal there being that you are part of something that you are not in charge of, and you are part of something that doesn't really have much to do with your work. A community that will know you, that ultimately one day, God willing, will bury you, and will know you as a whole person rather than as the figurehead or the leader of a particular venture. So the baselines, that's how we set the baseline.
6 kind of values that you're wanting to build into your community, all of which are countercultural. 6 baseline practices to kind of move from aspiration to hopefully formation. And then you have, tell us about what you call reach practices.
Yeah, so this is, I think our co-founder and CEO, Dave Blanchard, gets a lot of credit for this aspect. I don't remember if it was his idea, but certainly his instinct was, if we give entrepreneurs just a set of rules to follow, they will break all the rules. This is not a group of people who are like, please show me how to check the right boxes and color within the lines. Like, the very nature of the people we work with is that they're innovators. They're not
rule
really
breakers. Yes.
So it was vulnerable to ask a community like this to embrace a rule of life at all. And so we said, well, look, let's do this. Let's give everyone a baseline, because we do need a baseline. It's not meaningful without a baseline. We can't have everybody just make up their time practice, But
or keep it at this kind of aspirational. Yeah, we want to be not as hurried and busy, and we want to. That's where I see so many people fail.
Wow.
They're like, yeah, I'm with you. I want to be less hurried. I want to be less anxious. I want to be easy, and they stop at this kind of. So I'm going to just try to. I'm going to just try to be a less hurried person, and they stop there.
Yes.
And then they are just a chronically hurried person.
Wow.
No matter, even though their intention is 1,000% genuine and heartfelt, I think.
I think that's very right. Statements of values don't go that far. I mean, it's better than not stating values, but you have
communal
to
practices,
into a communal practice.
Not just practice, but communal. We are doing this together as a community.
Yeah, that's really good. So to go beyond the baseline, we have 2 further sections in each of the 6, which is we call them reach practices, which are things you could try once you're like, oh, all these I've kept from my youth. I'm tithing, I'm taking a Sabbath. Well, here are some things that people in our community actually do. So, for example, on the money one, tithing is conventionally done on your income. That's your flow of money through a given year. Let's say you aim to give away 10%. But we have people in our community who tithe on their assets. So one of the reach practices is add up all your assets and take 10% of that and give it, which is a very different thing from just sort of looking at what's coming in and diverting 10% to charity. Then we talk. So we have reach practices, and then we also have this section called creative approaches, which is an even more open-ended category of like, how could you really rethink your approach in this area? So, at this moment, I'm sort of blanking on specific creative approaches that are in our official rule, but we've tried to encourage, and the Praxis team, every month we take one of these 6 and we talk through it as a team, because all of our partners are committed to the rule of life, and everyone in our community is invited to it. And often what we do is we actually ask people to share, like, what's something that's helped you keep the Sabbath in a deeper way, like beyond the baseline. And we get very different answers because people are beautifully creative. So baseline, creative reach practices, creative approaches. And then for every one of these, we end that section of the rule with what we call the hope for abundance, which is this is not a law for the sake of constraining or constricting us. This is an invitation that we hope, if we actually lived this way, if I actually kept the Sabbath, that there would be a kind of restfulness and hopefulness in the way I do my work 6 days a week that I'm not going to get any other way. So we try to articulate that briefly in the rule.
We'll put a link in the show notes to the Praxis Rule of Life, which people can look at online for the specifics. But one thing I love about what you're doing is, this tiny little micro resurgence in rule of life that this conversation is a part of in the modern church is beautiful and is tragically 9 times out of 10 or 99 times out of 100 run through the grid of the assumption of Western culture, which is radical individualism.
Yeah.
So Andy is writing his rule of life. John Mark's writing, I just talked about myself in the third person. It should be part of my rule of life to never do that. But you get the idea. You get the drift. With individual people writing their own personalized rule of life. Which again, I'm not against that at all. But historically, it's a little odd because it's not really what a rule of life is, right? So what I love about what you're doing is you're doing this as a community.
Yeah.
So, talk to us about that. What power are we missing? If I go away on a 2-day retreat and I write a rule of life for myself, which is a good thing. That's still a giant step in the right direction.
Way better than not having one at
1,000.
all. Right.
But what are we missing there without the community? Whether it's 500 people who are entrepreneurs all around the world, or 1,000 people, or 5 friends that are in a small group together or dorm room together.
Yeah.
What are we missing without the communal element?
I'm sure there's multiple answers. One is simply, Kurt Thompson, who's a psychiatrist that I think you know and a lot of people will know, talks about the power of other minds.
Yes.
We need other minds with our mind to actually choose the good. So it's simply knowing there are other people doing this actually strengthens your resolve to pursue it. But what came to mind is a simpler thing in a way, which is it is almost certainly the case if you join a communal rule of life that there will be things in it that you would not have put in your personal
That's exactly where my
list.
mind was going right now.
So for me, and this is an extremely humbling thing to have to say, or I don't know, extremely humbling, but it is humbling to say that I had every intention of having a rhythm of daily prayer in my life when I joined Praxis. It's not like I intended not to have daily prayer. And at some seasons of my life, I've had a practice of daily prayer. But honestly, when I joined Praxis for various reasons, I had neglected this. It's not that I didn't seek to be in communion with God. And it's very embarrassing to bring this up. Like,
you weren't praying every day, Andy. Just say it.
I certainly was not. I had no plan to pray every day. And no doubt there were days I never prayed. And so we go through this process. We discover.
And one of your baselines is
one of our baselines is daily prayer. And so the time comes for all the partners, like we go first, right? It's like the Declaration of Independence. We pledge our lives, our fortunes, our sacred honor. We're going to do this. You all come with us. And I want to do it. But if I had gone on a retreat and written a rule of life, honestly, I think I would have been embarrassed to put it in my rule of life because I wasn't doing it. And it would seem too elementary. And am I not a teacher in Israel? I should be attempting something really impressive, right? But this basic thing I honestly was not doing. I sign on to the rule of life. I'm like, well, I'm not going to lie. I'm not going to not have integrity. So I regained a practice of daily prayer. And that's only because our community discerned, as every community that's ever thought about it has discerned, if you don't have a practice of daily approaching God, you're missing a key piece. And I had to submit myself to that communal discernment. So, and I'm the author. I was the lead author of it. But I wasn't doing everything that clearly needed to be in it. And if I'd been authoring it just for me, I think I would have evaded that.
That's one of the great gifts of a community in general, and a community rule in particular, in that we're so biased, particularly in the consumption culture that we're a part of, toward like a preference-based spirituality. So our kind of model discipleship, our way of following Jesus can quickly be denuded into like, hey, well, these are like the things I like to do and I'm drawn to. Which is not bad. Again, not bad. That's a giant step forward. but often they're not rounding out the
Right.
uneven edges.
Right.
And so it's all the extroverted people are like, yeah, we do community and celebration. They're like, but no silent prayer or,
Right.
Sabbath or
Yeah.
whatever.
Interesting.
And all the introverts are the opposite. They're like,
Yeah.
yes, I do Lectio Divina every single day, but I'm not going to confess my sin and talk vulnerably and emotionally with another person about my shadow. Like, no way,
Wow.
So it's like we need
Yes.
that community.
Yes.
That's one of the reasons I'm doing this with other people is because they push me toward things that I don't want to be pushed toward.
Right. Right. Completely.
And and it's just like, gosh, but I need that
Yeah.
because there's some deeper part of me that does want to be rounded out
Yeah.
into a whole person,
Yeah.
Now, historically, I think it's just absolutely fascinating that you built your rule around the assumption of cultural deformation.
Mm.
You
Yes.
started with the
Right.
assumption
Right.
that if
Yeah.
these people, well-meaning people who love Jesus and are somehow stamped with the Christian faith, if they go into this world of entrepreneurship, for profit, not for profit, they will be deformed by the larger and more
Right.
powerful cultural forces that will outweigh their good intentions. That was
Right.
your starting assumption,
Yes.
which is not a Christendom assumption. It is a post-Christendom assumption. I think it's the right one. And I think tragically, a lot of people don't start their life plan
Huh.
or community plan with that assumption. And then you named, like, hey, here are some of the major challenges that we are facing as entrepreneurs in our time and place. Is there historic precedence for this, for rule of lives being contextualized to the challenges of a particular people in a particular place?
Oh yes, I mean, I think that's the essence of it, and it starts with this flight from the urban, in some ways, the allegedly Christian empire. It's technically Christian, but this is the shadow side of Christendom. That when it's
And
technically,
you're thinking like 4th century.
oh yeah, we're
at
talking
this point.
fourth,
Yes.
fifth century
Yes.
of the Common Era. That everybody's now Christian, but that means the bar is very, very low.
Mhm.
So a bunch of serious people are like, no, we really want to follow Jesus. We believe this gospel is truly the transformative news for the world. And they leave the cities and they move out to the deserts and they sometimes form communities. And the thing is, I mean, it's a very noble thing to try to get out of the
Yes.
kind of the cultural mediocrity, the cultural Christianity.
The
around
main
you.
problem is you come with yourself.
Exactly. So you end up with these monastic communities, they come to be called, and
Which is where rule of life comes from.
this is
And
where the rule of life
monasteries
is
and orders
developed.
all come out of this.
right.
Yeah.
And so the way that I sometimes describe it to when I'm teaching this in praxis is, so what problems do monks have? What's the particular vocational temptation of being a monk or a nun, a religious, religious order, male or female? So really, there's two big ones. The first is pride, spiritual pride, because you consider, you have made choices to follow Jesus that your
I'm more
family
radical.
didn't.
I'm more serious. I'm not
Exactly.
like those normal Christians back in Rome or
Exactly.
Constantinople.
So,
Yeah.
so it turns out the monastery is like this hothouse for spiritual pride. Like, aren't we amazing? Which is unbelievably toxic to genuine Christian life.
Yes.
So second problem is other monks. The biggest, which is probably, we're going to be a community, John
Community,
Mark,
we're going to live in the
for
same
the rest of our lives.
vow of stability until we die together, the 30 of us.
Oh my gosh, the conflict, right?
Yes.
So you combine spiritual pride and other monks. So when you look at Benedict's rule, a lot of it, I mean, including, for example, the principle of ora et labora. In other words, we pray, but we also work. Like, you're
Yeah.
not so good that you don't work. And there are times in history when, I mean, there's an interesting example of this in contemporary life, that there's a kind of Orthodox Judaism where the people say our boys are so busy studying Torah, they can't serve in the military, can't do anything in public, right? Because they're so devoted
Yes, government
to spiritual
subsidized.
life.
Yes.
And Benedict, for his part, said for his community, that's not right. We're actually going to labor with our hands to provide for our community rather than just sort of soliciting donations so we can be our
Yes.
spiritual.
Monasteries were
spiritual-
not nonprofits. They were
Yeah, that's
small
interesting.
businesses as well.
Right.
Yeah.
And that was maybe partly practical, but also actually a spiritual intervention
Yes.
to prevent it becoming this kind of hothouse of spirituality disconnected from, like, provide for your family. You need to
Yeah.
provide through work. So the rule of life, I mean, all of us can learn a lot from the monastic rules, but they really are targeted at this moment in time, this particular group of people. And I think every kind of, in a sense, every Christian community needs to assess, drawing on and borrowing from the wisdom of others, what is the particular thing that's the particular temptation? And it's going to be different in Santa Monica versus Charlottesville versus Miami versus Bangladesh, so.
And it's going to be different in our century than it was 10
Yes.
centuries ago.
Yes,
I
totally.
mean, we're the first Christian generation to solve for the problem of screens.
Yes, exactly.
So
Exactly.
if we were to widen this scope out, because I think what you're saying is beyond important. I think one of the major problems we're facing right now with the kind of crisis of discipleship and the breakdown of the church in the West, in particular in America, is almost that we have, like you and I both like this idea that even if you've never heard the language rule of life before, you have a rule of life. You have some like way that you're living, some schedule, some set of practices, whether it's intentional or unintentional, conscious or unconscious, wise or utterly foolish. We all have some kind of paradigm by which we live. And so a rule of life is an ancient Christian paradigm that's more intentional about discipleship. But all that to say, I think part of the crisis, I think, my conviction is that we're living through is Christian spirituality that the version of Christian spirituality that many of us were handed coming up in the Western church is contextualized for a previous cultural moment. A Christendom moment, a more kind of stable family moment, a pre-digital moment. And now we're living in the wild west of a whole new pluralistic, digital, fast-paced, urbanized, breakdown of the family, socially isolated moment. And we have this almost kind of version of Christian spirituality that's for a world that, unless if you live in some remote corner of America, really does not exist anymore.
Right.
And so if you were to widen your scope out, I think you guys have done an amazing job of naming some of the particular temptations to the vocation of a redemptive entrepreneur. Let's just widen the scope out. Let's say you're not an entrepreneur. You're a stay-at-home mom or dad or a barista or a software engineer or a small business owner, whatever. You're living in this world that we call home right now.
Yeah.
You have access to the internet. You live in some kind of a quasi-metropolitan context. What would you name as, hey, these are some of the major temptations, major challenges that a Christian spirituality for the modern world has to solve for, or you will be deformed no matter what your heart's intentions are?
So I won't give you a exhaustive list, but three things come very prominently to mind that I think we haven't paid enough attention to maybe. So I'll list them: liquidity, media, and algorithms. So, and I haven't rehearsed this, so let's see if this makes sense.
This is Andy Crouch off the top of his head.
It is, so all caveats applied. But, and I'm saying them in that order because they stack on top of each other. So the defining economic reality that we all live in is a world of liquid wealth or liquid money. Money and liquidity go together.
Yeah, define that for us.
So, well, wealth up until the blink of an eye ago in human history resided mostly in land. So it was the wealth of the land, the productive capacity of the land was the source of wealth. So a wealthy person, a wealthy family in even up to the time of Jesus is someone who owns land and can benefit from the harvest. There's a series of things that happen to shift the kind of center of wealth from land to money. And the key thing about money is you can carry it around and you can exchange it for other things. And in fact, you want to. In fact, its only use is to be exchanged for other things. So there's a lot to say about this, but where it ends up taking us is to a world where actually, in a way, everything is liquidatable.
Interesting.
That is
interchangeable.
Exactly.
Based on preference.
Yes, based on preference and relative value and your desire to exchange one thing for another. Yeah. So this translates even into mobility. Like, where is your home? Fewer and fewer people can answer that. And it's not necessarily because they don't wish they had a home or didn't once have a home, but they live under the pressures of liquidity that basically say you have to liquidate your home and move somewhere else. And that can happen under political pressure, but mostly it happens for economic reasons. And
Yeah.
people,
For your career or
exactly,
for preference, or I want to live this place.
people follow the money.
Yep.
But there's so many dimensions of this, and it's one of these things. There's this social theorist Zygmunt Bauman who's written about this as liquidity as the defining kind of feature of modernity. That everything gets liquidated in a way. Your identity, your body, your career, all these things become
your relationships, your family of origin.
Yep, yep. All of it is
Exchangeable.
Exchange is fungible material, all to be turned into money that you believe is going to give you optionality to pursue whatever you want. The only problem is by the time you've liquidated everything, you don't even know who you are or what you want anymore. So I think liquidity, there's so many dimensions to it we could talk about for a long time, but let me maybe say why I think the other two are different. So then on top, so we build this economic system that's very money driven. And then we start to try to figure out like what generates the most money, basically. And one massive thing is media. So the revolution in media that mostly happened in the 20th century. So liquidity is like
that's been happening for a while.
It's hundreds
right?
of years. It's the rise of the merchant class in Europe. If you have to date it, 16th century, the invention of double entry accounting, the Medicis is like where it starts. So that's a multi-hundred-year thing. In the 20th century, we invent these media that harness the human imagination, that access the human imagination through visual images in a way that's first radio and then TV and film. And these have a power in human life that the theater did not have, as powerful as theater is, that poetry did not have, that music did not have. As powerful as those things are, when they are refracted, and all of those arts, all those classical arts of drama and poetry and literature and music, they all get kind of brought into the mediated world, and they become, 100 times more powerful in shaping the imagination of human beings. And the people who wield them, both on camera and behind camera, become the generators of incredible amounts of wealth, post-industrial wealth, right? Because you're not really we're making a video right now. We're not really making anything.
We're not making a chair or a table or a house
right.
or a socket.
Right. In one sense, no good is coming out of this, but imagination is.
Yes.
And I'm not one of these people, but you kind of are. The people who are really good on camera, the people who have like the charisma on screen, end up with amazing amounts of power to shape our imagination of what it is to be human, really.
Not based on their character necessarily.
But entirely orthogonal to their character, like irrelevant character, because character is about depth. Character is revealed over time. The camera captures you at a carefully chosen moment. I mean, it's as true for you and me as anyone. Hey, you're getting the best Andy that I can figure out how to present right now, which is very dangerous, right? And so the dangers to those on camera, but the dangers also to those whose mode of imagination is shaped by media are profound. And I have to say, I'm 55 years old, I should have gotten used to this by now, but I go for walks in my neighborhood, and it is kind of overwhelming me that every house I pass at night, there is a glowing big, like 72-inch rectangle in the pride of place in the home that is just welcoming in, like shape us, tell us a story, entertain us, raise us up to some transcendent level, whether it's our favorite team or our favorite star or our favorite game show or whatever. And every house, it's happening in every house.
Yeah, even Albert Borgman's whole thing about how homes used to be built with a front porch where you could sit and interact with neighbors. And then the inside was built around a hearth.
The hearth.
Where there's a fire and you come together as a community for conversation and life around the fire. And now houses are built with a backyard and with a movie room in the back of the house.
Oh my gosh.
And just the symbolic architecture. It's not symbolic, like that is a very physical manifestation of a cultural radical change.
And by the way, I'm not saying money is all bad. I'm not saying media is all bad by any means, but gosh, if we're not intentional about it, then it is not. I mean,
the glowing screens will deform our soul.
I will add, I'll give you my crazy, unapproved by neurologists conviction that there's something neurological about the glow. specifically. So the fire that we used to all sit around at night before artificial light, you would have a fire for some period of time after nightfall. And you'd gather around it with other people. And if you've ever sat, as hopefully most people have, in front of like an actual fire, it's mesmerizing.
It's mesmerizing.
Because it glows. And very little in creation glows. The sun glows, too bright to look at. The stars glow, the moon glows. And glowworms or lightning bugs glow. And all of them are mesmerizing because it's very rare. Most light that we encounter in our daily life is reflected light. But there are these handful of things, fire basically, and certain chemical reactions.
Interesting. They are a source of light.
That transmit light. All the light that you and I are seeing each other in right now is reflected, right? In other words, I'm seeing the light bouncing off of you to my eyes. But if I see you on a screen, it's transmitted light. And I think transmitted light is mesmerizing in a way that reflected light is not, which is why if we had a monitor of you like this, the thing that our viewers are seeing if they're watching this on video, they're seeing you on camera. If I had that next to you, real you, I had a monitor, which we could easily set up here that would show me the camera's view of you, I would not be able to focus on you.
Interesting.
I would be drawn to the screen you because it's the glowing you.
It's more... me, but with filters. It's me plus.
Oh yeah, and then totally. I mean, then you add all the layers of processing that's possible to make that image more compelling. So I think we've got to reckon with like how our not just imagination is almost too small a word for it. It's because it's the heart, soul, mind, strength orientation toward the glowing thing rather than the real world of reflection that makes room for me to respond in a way that media kind of by definition does not. So then the third thing would be algorithms, which are stacked on top of this. So
it's, these all go together.
They all go together, and the one depends on the previous one. And the algorithm is this new thing. And I want to credit my daughter because my daughter who's 23 now and who wrote a book of her own about technology and kind of adolescence. She named this for me in a way that I hadn't, other people had seen it, but I hadn't seen it until my daughter said it. She said, Dad, I cannot entrust myself to the algorithms. She said, I won't use any social media that's algorithm driven, which most of them are. Because what the algorithm does, unlike the sort of screen of the 20th century, the screen of the 20th century was not watching you, Big Brother notwithstanding. It didn't have any kind of way to see what you were doing. There was Nielsen ratings and that kind of stuff, but very crude.
And you were seeing the same screen that I was seeing.
Yes.
You on the East Coast, you were seeing the same screen that I was seeing on the West Coast.
Yes, exactly. So there actually was a kind of vestigial communal experience that's completely gone now. Well, the algorithm is watching you, because it is giving you interaction opportunities. And every interaction opportunity it's measuring. And it's measuring how quickly, how long, all the things we know they're measuring. And then it is iterating to present you, based on what it learned about you, with the thing that will keep you on the screen.
Whatever will get your... Yeah, and it's not like wanting you to get into racism or pornography.
No, it doesn't care.
It just wants you to get into whatever will distract you and steal your attention. It does not care if it's cat videos or plumbing, totally YouTube. It does not even care what it is. Just whatever your brain will go to, which turns out to be not the good things.
Or if I look at, so YouTube does this, and I do sometimes use YouTube to watch something, and then I sometimes click on a link just because I think I have time or I'm lazy or, I do what we all do, right?
I've never done this before. Never clicked on an unintentional, unplanned link that's not in my rule of life and in line with my deepest heart's desire.
With your quantity, frequency, and moral
Never gone down the rabbit hole of Brad Pitt's houses. Never have I spent an hour on YouTube.
So then you end up with this crazy mashup in the right column of all the videos it thinks you want to watch that are like this horrifying combination of reasonably edifying and utterly embarrassing, like one after another, right? Because it knows. But what it knows of you is not who you are at your best. It knows you at your most impulsive,
your basest,
your lowest resistance,
your fear,
the moments when you're most tired, the moments when you're most anxious. That's what it captures, right? And your initial instinct. How often is my initial instinct the healthiest thing in any conversation, in any setting? And the algorithm sees you in those moments and then reinforces and gives you another chance to kind of keep dwelling in that.
Yeah, because it wants to highlight that broken part of you.
Yeah. Or yeah,
It wants to pour
leverage it.
gasoline on the fire. Yep. It
Yes.
wants to monetize it. It wants to make
Yes.
money off of that part
Exactly.
of you.
And that's different from the days when you kind of chose which movie to watch out of 4 options with your friends, or you watched the TV show on at prime time. Because now it's inside your dopamine cycle, really. It's inside your own personal reward cycle. And it knows you better. It knows this part of you. It doesn't know you well at all, but it knows this part of you better than you know yourself by far. And we all are living with how damaging that is.
Yeah.
And every iteration of social media gets more algorithm driven. And so I still use the service frequently known as Twitter, now known as X as we speak, because I can actually evade the algorithm. There's a way to use Twitter that doesn't expose you to the algorithm, but there is no way to use TikTok without being exposed to the algorithm. The TikTok is the
algorithm, yeah.
And it's the most engaging, the most compelling. And so many parents hand their kids phones because they want a way to get home from soccer practice. But what they're handing them is the algorithm. And the algorithm is going to get into their kids' lives in an astonishing way that has like world historical consequences potentially.
So through your naming.
So you asked.
No, it's very helpful. You're naming liquidity, media, and the algorithms as 3 of the great challenges that we're facing for. Perfect example in that very few Christian discipleship programs or Christian spiritualities that I know are built around solving for these 3 problems.
Yeah.
Maybe the first one a little bit, certainly not the second. If anything, often Christian spirituality is just like co-opt those very things. Hey, we're just going to use TikTok to preach the gospel.
Yeah,
we're just going to, as if we can use these things
as if they're neutral.
As if they are neutral, exactly. So what are all right, Andy Crouch, as we wind down this conversation, Andy Crouch to the world, to the internet, to the interwebs, what are a few practices that most modern followers of Jesus would consider, quote, normal, that you think need to go? And what are a few practices that may be obscure or radical or too much or unheard of or just not on people's radar that you think, man, you've got to have these counter practices in your life to solve for the problems of liquidity, media, and algorithms?
Well, I hate to say this because it's unimaginable, but I just think it's necessary. We have to not expose ourselves to algorithms. I think they're the worst of the 3.
Interesting.
Because they so sever us from even our own best intentions for ourselves, let alone the community that could help us actually pursue that intention. And I will say, once you get yourself out from under it, you can't imagine why you would go back. I think there's some things that are genuinely good, but that also become snares for us. I wonder sometimes. I love wine and I drink wine, and I don't believe I have a fundamentally disordered relationship to wine, but I do wonder sometimes about wine is intoxicating even in small amounts. And
money feels in that category.
Money is like, you got to handle money, but you always feel like,
and there's an aspect of it that feels like blessing.
Yeah.
But then there's the shadow side.
Right. So I guess what I'm saying is, if I see a good, wine in Scripture is described as gladdening the human heart, and it creates conviviality. It has these good things, but it also has the shadow side. I actually do not feel that way now that I've been off Facebook for many years. I know how people use it for relative good, but now that I'm away from it, suppose that my spiritual director or counselor or family or whatever said, Andy, you need to stop drinking wine. I think I would. And I would be sad and I would miss it. I think I'd miss the good things about it for the rest of my life. There's nothing I miss about Facebook except the people the relationships that Facebook has colonized. And now the only thing I miss is that we have built no other way to find out when someone is getting married or has had a child or, some big life event that only gets announced on Facebook. Like, that's the only thing I miss. But there's nothing about Facebook I miss. I'm so glad I'm not ensnared in that anymore.
Yes.
So I think the reason I hate to say it is, it's very negative to say you got to stop doing this, and most of us can't imagine stopping. But I just have to say there is freedom on the other side. There's real life on the other side. My own kids are not on any of these apps, and they don't miss it, and they have amazing friends, and their friends don't miss it, and they are a minority, but they're a happy minority who are also incidentally, as it happens with our kids, following Jesus, which is a good thing. And it's not incidental that they've found a small group of people who are engaged in a very serious act of resistance against the algorithms. So that would be one thing.
And that's the only way the model, the Silicon Valley business model will ever change. It's the only power we have is just non-cooperation. If there's any chance of a non-algorithm based version ever existing in the world,
you got to have a substantial community that you just can't reach that way.
Yep.
Right. And I will say, one of the great things about Praxis right now is we have a whole host of entrepreneurs we're working with who are building alternatives in various ways. And, whether it's someone like Greg Lutzy, who founded Visco, which is a non-algorithmically driven online photo app. Now, Visco has had its own story that Greg will talk about, I think, of complexity, like how it got swept up in social media. But it was built as an alternative. Just to give you a very quick example, because I hate to be so negative. Instagram, as originally designed, when you open up the app, which camera on your phone is active? Do you know?
No, I don't.
The selfie camera. So when you open Instagram, your phone can either look out at the world or look at you.
Look in.
The default camera is me, right?
Wow.
Visco, by design, when you open the app, the camera that is looking out at the world. And so it was this invitation built into the design of the product to say, no, use this as an instrument, use this as a medium of artistic expression rather than sort of self-glorification. So there are things we can do to redesign that we should be doing. But you asked, what should we stop doing? And I would say, you got to reduce the footprint of the algorithm in your life radically.
Radically.
At cost, at
Either
social
it's
cost.
gone or it's so decimated that it's no longer.
You're so illegible.
forming
You have to become
Yes.
illegible to the algorithm. So even though I'm still on Twitter, I'm illegible to Twitter's algorithm because I don't use it in a way that it can then, repackage its content for me. I just never give it the data it needs, and I never go to the parts of the site that feed that, right? So then I would say, I'm working backwards. So I don't know how we do anything with the algorithm but scorched earth. It's just too insidious to have a half measure. With screens, my belief is there are ways to use them, but if I could just do one thing, I'd get them out of bedrooms.
Yes.
Just out of bedrooms. Like, let's just start. If all we did was, and both TVs and phones, just not have them in any bedroom, you wouldn't believe what would change in Western life, American life. So, there's a lot of other things I could say about that, but just start with no phones in bedrooms, no TVs in bedrooms. And the rest you would experience, there's this really, really poignant thing happening with kids, which is that the great majority of kids as of today take their phones with them to bed. And what happens on the phones overnight is a constant stream. Parents do not understand this. A constant stream of messages from their friends, often about distress, because it's at night that the distress comes up. And these poor kids are trying to help each other. Like, you have kids who are thinking about suicide. You have kids who are struggling with whatever, and they're messaging their friends, and their friends are trying to help, all of them in the solitariness of their bedrooms. If you take the phone out of the bedroom, that kid in distress opens the door and walks, it's a little emotional to imagine like how normal this was and how normal it's not anymore, but would walk down the hall, maybe to their older sister's room or to their parents' room and say, Mom, I can't sleep, I need help. And they would get a relational connection that instead is being mediated with a bunch of adolescents who have no idea how to handle this stuff. So like the effects on mental health, on emotional health, on just our restedness for the next day, and it would just be wild. Liquidity is the hardest one because it's the deepest one. it is the foundation of whatever all of us think we enjoy, of prosperity and affluence and opportunity, and it's not all wrong. And the only you got to make some decisions for stability. You got to make some parts of your life non-liquidatable.
To not trade up.
Yeah. So right. So staying in the house rather than if you're the kind of family that has that option, like you could move to the bigger house, stay in the smaller house. Like actually people don't need more bedrooms. They need fewer bedrooms. Like we need to be closer to each other. Stay put when it gets hard. I mean, there's just so many versions of this, but and maybe this is too broad an answer for what you were asking, but we've got to decide my life is not all convertible into currency. There are things I will not liquidate, but to do that these are very costly decisions.
Yeah, but I mean, the other way to think about it is, yes, they cost you a lot, but they cost you a lot less than what we're paying right now.
No,
I mean, this is the bargain of a lifetime.
Totally.
That was
Yes.
whole.
Yeah.
Bonhoeffer had the whole cost of discipleship thing.
Yeah.
But, and he was a rebuttal to what he called cheap grace. But Willard and others said, yes, and you also have to calculate the cost of non-discipleship. So yes, it will cost you a lot to become a serious follower of Jesus, but it will cost you far more to not become a serious follower of Jesus, whether you're agnostic or just a nominal Christian. That will cost you this extraordinary life that's on offer with Jesus that you will miss out on, or you just barely taste what could have been a feast. And so, yes, it will cost people, but I think so many people have the experience where when you wean yourself off of, let's say, social media or what you would call the algorithm, it's like literally your body going through addiction symptoms.
Oh, completely. Yep.
And then you reach a point, if you stay with it, where there's almost this switch to like revulsion.
Yep.
So, this is embarrassing, but I've had this mixed relationship with social media, which mostly means I hate it. But it is a lock-in system. This is Joan Lanier's whole thing. It's like the problem with social media is it's a lock-in system. If you do certain types of work, it's very hard to do that type of work.
Can you imagine?
Yes, especially the work
having
that
a
you and I.
platform.
Exactly. And so I have so many contradictory and mixed thoughts about it. So where I'm at now, timestamp this moment, and I hopefully will be somewhere better in the near future, is on Instagram, I delete it off my phone. I go on once a week, I re-download it, and I post like one or two things, all for work, just like to put stuff out. It's just, let people know, here's where you can find more work or whatever. And then I delete it off my phone again. I don't even think about it. And I don't follow anybody, right? And so I have 0 followers or whatever. But every once in a while, my thumb will just err a half inch to the side. And so all I see then is just whatever the algorithm is feeding me.
Oh boy.
And sometimes I'll take 2-3 minutes.
You see like the uncut
just out of
algorithm.
curiosity. And this is not like me and my friends and what's Andy doing? Oh, Andy's just got married. It's none of that. This is just like
the
whatever
sum total of humanity's
the algorithm
follies.
thinks my brain wants to look at. And it's humiliatingly accurate at times, but the revulsion in my spirit, now that and it's not virtue. It's not like I'm there being a disciplined, virtuous person. I'm going to rise above this. I will look at that page for 2 minutes and think, what a miserable. People do this multiple times a day. And it's not virtue in me that is saying no to that. Your heart switches over and you're like, no, my life is so much better, so much freer, so much like more at ease and at peace, free of this. So I just think that's one very common example for anybody that's ever spent time away from the algorithms. Most people would say, oh yeah, I was a healthier person. I was a happier person. I was a more peaceful person.
Yeah.
And so few people have experimented, say, with money or with stability or with these other things. To imagine. So I think, yes, it is a costly call, but I don't hear it in a negative way. I hear it in a aspirational way of but because the cost we're all paying right now is so much higher,
No, that's right. That's right.
Well, Andy, thank you for not being a normal person. I mean that in the best, most complimentary sense of the word. I just think, when the Desert Fathers and Mothers left what was considered civilization to go off, everybody thought they were crazy. but they thought everybody else was nuts. That just to live the status quo life of compromise
Yeah.
with the world was nuts, you know? And I think there's something about, like, one of the things I love about as people get older, they tend to get a little weirder. You know, like most older people have their quirks
Yes.
because at some point
Quirkiness compounds.
they stop kind of carrying
Yes.
what the herd is doing a little bit more, and they're especially the really interesting ones or really thoughtful ones, and they tend to just be like, no, I'm living, this is how I'm living. And there's something just so compelling and beautiful about that I think beyond quirkiness, there's a Jesus version of that I think you model so beautifully. And I want that to become more and more true of my life. So thank you for your life. Thank you for your work. Thank you. You're just such a gift to talk to. And I hope this is one more conversation on a long list of conversations we get to have about this stuff.
Indeed.
Anything in closing you want to say to round us off? Closing words?
Keep coming back. It works.
Yeah.
I mean, the fruit, my life is a mess, like start to finish. Anyone who knows me well knows versions of that, but it's also like way better than it could have been. And it's because we keep coming back, right, to the way of Jesus. And it actually works. It, like, to be at my middle older stage of life and to know joy, which is just not a given in your 50s, and to know joy, to know the gospel is true and that Jesus is real. That's not an accident. It's not my doing, not my achieving, but wow, it keep coming back. It works.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to Season 1 of the Practicing the Way podcast. This conversation was based on John Mark's newest book, Practicing the Way. Be with Jesus, become like Jesus, do as he did, which is available now wherever books are sold. This podcast was created by Practicing the Way, a nonprofit working to integrate the best learnings of spiritual formation into the church at large. We offer a library of free resources for churches and small groups, including practices, 4-week experiences designed to be run in community that train you to integrate ancient disciplines like Sabbath, prayer, and more into your everyday life with God. An upcoming Practicing the Way course, an 8-week primer on apprenticeship to Jesus, a digital tool called the Rule of Life Builder, podcasts, and more. We are a crowd-funded nonprofit, and all of these resources are completely free, thanks to the generosity of the Circle and other givers from around the world. To join the Circle, run a practice, or learn more, visit practicingtheway.org.